As we've been analyzing the 400-page Mueller report, we have it stacked up here on the desk.
I heard. Something like that.
It's revealing some new details about Russia's attempts to influence the 2016 election, its relationship with WikiLeaks, and efforts to hack prominent Democrats, including Hillary Clinton. CBSN legal contributor Keir Dougal and CBSN political contributor Molly Hooper are still here. Plus, we now also have CNET senior producer Dan Patterson to join us in this chat. You know, Dan, you made the point earlier, Democrat or Republican, we should all be concerned about what's in this report when it comes to hacking. It's incredible the extent the Russians went to not only hack social media, but throw fake rallies. I mean, they had their hand in almost every corner of the campaigns, both campaigns.
That's right, Tanya. No matter where you stand on the partisan side of the political aisle, what's incredibly important here to recognize is that not just American elections, but institutions within America that uphold our democracy were attacked by a foreign actor at a price that was, relative to the scale of our adversaries and our allies, fairly inexpensive. This is one euphemism that we use: coordinated, inauthentic activity. And what that euphemism entails is a few things. One, actual computer hacking. The Russians, including a group called APT28, that stands for Advanced Persistent Threat, used malware called X-Tunnel and a few other components to log the keystrokes as well as take screenshots of Hillary campaign staffers. And they were able to attack those accounts using something, a tactic we've discussed here many times, a very low-tech tactic that is very sophisticated called spear phishing. It's when you send fake emails to people designed to trick them into handing over their usernames and passwords. John Podesta famously was phished by the Russians, but several dozen Clinton campaign staffers were attacked. And according to the documents that we saw today, they laid the groundwork. Russian attackers laid this groundwork in 2014 and 15.
Amazing. And it's at that point they were just trying to sort of sow discord, and then they got a little more focused as the election approached. Is that right?
Yeah, that's exactly right. So the second tactic here was designed to, we call it gaslighting now, but designed to undermine Americans' faith and confidence in our democratic institutions as well as justice institutions. That includes the FBI, the CIA, the NSA, and the DNI. Those are stalwarts of the intelligence community.
What I was amazed to see was how they were able even to throw these fake rallies that seemed so authentic, because they seemed to really understand the differences between these sort of micro groups. You know, like a Hispanic rally in Miami might look like this versus, you know, a Black Lives Matter rally might look like this. And they were so specific as to be so convincing that even President Trump would tweet after one of these fake rallies saying, you know, great showing in Miami.
Yeah, that's exactly right, Tanya. This was the third component of the coordinated, inauthentic activity, and that's what we call an influence campaign. These ran across Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, and other social media sites, and they're designed to appear authentic, even though we call them inauthentic. So what they did on Facebook was create groups. They attracted influencers within a GOP and conservative circles, invited those people to the accounts, and then encouraged them to invite their actual authentic friends and seeded those with propaganda, including invites to rallies. Some of these rallies were attended by a dozen or very few people, but some of these rallies were attended by hundreds of people.
Okay, so how do we look at something on social media and figure out it's one of these BS rallies that never even happened, right? I mean, my uncle messaged me the other day and said, is this legit? He's a 67-year-old man. He's got a Facebook account, and it wasn't legit. So how do we figure that out going forward?
David, that is the incredibly important question. So attribution, when it comes to cybersecurity and cyber defense, is always very, very difficult because there are a number of methods of obscuring your identity. However, we can look to the social networks themselves and say, hey, what were the originating IP addresses? Do they have a long-term history? Can we find them in other dumps? And can we look to see if this activity belongs to accounts that are spread across the social web and have real avatars? The problem is that the Russians also scraped the social web and used avatars of real people. They also used this malware called X-Tunnel to obfuscate their identities. It acts just like a VPN. That's a virtual private network, and it's a tunnel between you and the outside world which hides your IP address.
And Dan, 2020 is coming up. Has anything changed? Is this still going on?
That's the important thing to recognize here. Look, we need to dissect this report and learn all the particulars in regards to the past. But when we look at defending upcoming elections, not just here in the United States, but democratic elections all around the world, they are under assault by a few particular actors. And yes, the United States engages in some of these tactics as well, including influence campaigns. But really, the masters of influence campaigns are Russia, China, Iran, Saudi Arabia, and North Korea. These countries actively pursue election hacking all over the world. And when we look at 2020, we need to look at how the other candidates treat each other. Democrats have used these tactics as well. And it's really important that once the hacking genie is out of the bottle, you don't put the information, the tactics back in the bottle. All of this information is out there, and so we know the techniques that can be used at large scale and low cost.
So, Dan, other than relying on, let's say, Facebook to get their act straight and stop and prevent this from happening, what can people do at home? Is there a certain software you can buy that will further protect you? I mean, what can we do in the near term?
Well, the thing is, social networks have been designed for speed and virality as opposed to safety. And a number of the people in technology communities right now are talking about the advances in artificial intelligence that speed up this already quick pace of information. So the one thing you can do, there is no software you can buy.
Okay.
The one thing you can do is slow down your online activity. Think twice before you click on an email that could ask you to fork over your username and password, and maybe spend less time on social networks. I know that's not really a one-click fix.
No, that's important because I just realized, and we probably have all gotten these emails, where it looks like the body of the email is something that involves your work. But if you click on the actual address of the person who sent it to you, and I got one of these the other day, it's, let's say, CBS News at xyzqpd.com.
Yes.
And that's where you know it's phishing.
With that.
That's really important if you're watching this right now. If you get an email that you think is, okay, well, that seems legit because they mentioned me and that's my story, click on the actual person who sent it to you, and you'll notice their email address is squirrely, right?
Molly,
I just don't read my email.
I want to ask you something.
That's
Touche.
Obviously, the DNC was badly burned by all of this already. So how are they preparing? What are they doing? What kind of security measures are in place?
Well, that's a good question because ever since the DNC situation happened back in 2016, both parties, because it wasn't just the DNC. I mean, the Republicans were at risk as well. Sure. They took some different tactics in preparing themselves and hopefully better securing their media accounts and whatnot. But, it's a good question. I mean, they definitely are in touch with the DOJ and with FBI. I mean, you have your cyber warriors out there in the federal government. But I think that, as we move forward, a lot of it has to do with remaining diligent. And this isn't sexy stuff. I mean, you're spending money on somebody to prevent you from getting hacked, and you can't really see the fruits of that labor coming out. It's just sort of an invisible shield, but it's a very important one that they need. And I think that campaigns are concerned about it because viral is good in this world of politics. You want more clicks, you want more hits, you want more eyes on your campaign. And with 35,000 people running for president in the Democratic field. I mean, it's just kidding, not 35,000, but you know what I mean. There's a lot. They're all vying for attention.
Sorry. No, I was going to ask about the specter of WikiLeaks. Is that still a threat? I mean, Julian Assange is under arrest, but clearly, there was a lot going on in 2016 with WikiLeaks.
Yeah, so the thing about WikiLeaks is that the vulnerabilities they present are kind of out in the open. So when WikiLeaks had the trust of media organizations, it might have made it a little easier for them to publish or republish accounts or sensitive data. But the challenge is it's pretty easy for anyone to do what we call exfiltration, and that is to trick or fish your way into an account and then take data, take information, and publish it anywhere. WikiLeaks, it didn't appear as though they did the transformative work of journalists, which is, they will look for information that could be sensitive and, wink, wink, redact some of that information. So what they really did is simply republish and repurpose information that was already out in the wild.
How many Russians have been arrested involved in this hacking?
It's over 30.
It's over 30.
Yeah.
Keir, our producer had a good question. He said, ask Keir what kind of collaboration there is, right? Like, say you're a federal prosecutor.
Rather, not arrested, but charged.
Charged,
Yeah,
right.
yeah.
So charged 30 or so people. With all the information you get and gather from charging those folks, what kind of collaboration exists between, let's say, the federal prosecutors and the intelligence community?
So that was one of the things that I thought was remarkable about the troll farm indictment and the hacking indictment relating to the Russians, is the indictment's ability to put individual people at particular keyboards at particular times typing particular stuff. That level of depth, of transparency that obviously came out of the intelligence work was, I thought, remarkable, and lends those indictments to some potential criticism about sort of tipping the hand about how good at least some of our sources and methods are. But I want to tie back on what Dan was saying about preventive measures in the future. I think that the discussion about individuals trying to prevent bad things from happening by clicking, as you mentioned, that's great. I'd love to see the social media companies try to do a better job. But, that's like the roosters guarding or the fox guarding the hen house. Mm-hmm. And it's in situations like this where I think it's fair to ask questions about whether the government can get involved and help in a way at a systematic, sort of 100,000-foot level to try to reduce those risks. And I understand that
what would that look like?
Well, that's the big question, because it could also look like it could be First Amendment issues there. Yeah. So it would have to be done, very carefully. But when you hear the president at various times saying, well, we don't know that it was Russia, when Mueller's report tells us that it was, the consensus view of the intelligence community is that it was Russia. When he says, well, it could be some heavy-set guy on a bed somewhere. When you're undermining the law enforcement and the intelligence community about these conclusions, you're heading in the wrong direction.
Well, Mark Zuckerberg did say he would like to see some standards imposed by the government when it comes to political advertising, so that you have to meet a certain threshold.
Well, he also knows that because this is such an issue to the members of Congress, guess what? They have to get elected. These are all people who are running for office every 2 years in the case of the House, every 6 years in the case of the Senate, and they don't want to get hacked. They don't want to be victims of this. And so that's why you're seeing people like, the head of Twitter and Facebook and all these other social media companies up on the Hill, it seems like every other week, talking about this issue of regulation. What more can we do to get involved? And then you get into the issue of freedom of speech and which users are getting cracked down on and bias and whatnot. And it's when it comes to AI, just listening to the Facebook representative, I think it was 2 weeks ago at a hearing on anti-hate, in front of the Judiciary Committee, and listening to this, logarithm of how AI comes up with their calculations as to what qualifies as hate speech and what doesn't, was just mind-boggling. And I think talking to lawmakers, they have a similar reaction. They just don't know how to rein it in, because how much is too much.
And by the way, Dan, you can talk about the vulnerabilities of AI being in charge of all of this, right?
Yeah, there's some real challenges with both regulation as well as artificial intelligence. I was just in San Francisco and Seattle speaking with tech executives about these challenges, and they say, look, there is perhaps an ulterior motive that Mr. Zuckerberg floats when he talks about artificial intelligence and regulation, and that is that these regulations that are being proposed, or those in the ballpark, are incredibly expensive, and that would tamp down competition to social networks like Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. And it would keep the playing field fairly even for them to apply, because this is so confusing, them to apply their own standards that are advantageous to the businesses that we saw being pretty heavily exploited. The issue with artificial intelligence is that it presents a broad spectrum of problems. AI is really nothing more than algorithms, if-then statements. So if this, then do this. But they're really, really complex if-then statements. So when you start to introduce things like bias, which is regulation. It is a bias towards one thing or another. All of a sudden, you have all of these unintended consequences. So once again, the challenge is that social networks have been designed for speed and virality and not necessarily for safety. And by safety, I mean making sure that we are slow and methodical about our consumption of information.
Keir, Dan, Molly, thank you.